Good morning from Mission Control Houston, and welcome to this Friday's edition of International Space Station Update. So, pretty busy week for the crew as they dealt with a number of science experiments and maintenance tasks throughout the week, and also some unexpected communications issues. Starting off on Monday, our three USOS crew members, Marshburn, Hadfield, and Commander Ford, enjoyed an off duty day for the President's Day holiday. Following that, moving into Tuesday, they went in with a number of tasks, including Commander Kevin Ford preparing some items for the upcoming Dragon space flight to the International Space Station. That Dragon spacecraft, the second full-up commercial resupply mission of the cargo craft, scheduled to launch next week on Friday. We'll be bringing you live coverage of all of the Dragon events here on NASA TV. Again, that launch scheduled for Friday, March 1st at 9:10 a.m. If all goes according to plan, they'll then set that up for an early morning grapple and rendezvous on Saturday, March 2nd, delivering another cache of supplies to the astronauts on board the International Space Station. So again, on Tuesday, Commander Ford was preparing a number of items that are going to be returned on that Dragon spacecraft. Meanwhile, Chris Hadfield was inside of the Quest airlock doing some routine maintenance, scrubbing out the cooling loops on the U.S. Spacesuits used by these astronauts for spacewalks. While he was doing that, Tom Marshburn was collecting a few water samples from the station's environmental health system. But also on Tuesday at about 9:45 a.m. Central Time, the station experienced a temporary loss of communication with the grounds. This was due to an ongoing process by flight controllers as they were updating the station's command and control software. And as they were transitioning from one of the primary computers to a backup computer, the loss of communication occurred. Mission Control here in Houston was able to communicate with the crew whenever they flew over the set of Russian ground stations. Were able to relay instructions to the crew to connect to another computer to begin the process of restoring communications, completing that successfully. And moving on to Wednesday, Ford and Marshburn were inside of the cupola conducting a training session with the station's robotic arm known as Canada Arm 2, Space Station Robotic Manipulator System. They'll be using it to reach out and grapple with the Dragon spacecraft once it makes its way to the International Space Station next Saturday. So they were conducting a training session, familiarizing themselves with the controls. Meanwhile, Tom Marshburn was working on the common cabin air assembly, replacing some of the temperature and humidity control components, while our three Russian cosmonauts on board the station, Oleg Novitsky, Evgeny Turelkin, and Roman Romanenko, were busy on Wednesday reviewing all of the cargo items that are going to be located in the Soyuz TMA-06M vehicle. That's the one that brought Ford, Novitsky, and Turelkin to the International Space Station back in October. They were reviewing all the items that are going to be stored in that vehicle when those three astronauts return home, coming up on March 15th. And moving on to Thursday, Commander Kevin Ford was back inside of that Soyuz with his two Russian cosmonaut crewmates, checking out their specialized seat liners as they continue to do some of the prep work for that upcoming departure. Commander Ford also getting some hands on a pretty interesting science experiment on Thursday known as In Space 3, which looks to obtain data on various fluids that contain specialized particles that have the ability to change their physical properties in response to varying magnetic fields, having some pretty significant implications in improving the earthquake resistance and structural integrity of large-scale building projects down here on Earth, like bridges and skyscrapers. Also on Thursday, Canadian Chris Hadfield was taking a number of microbial samples from the station's air system and also a number of the surfaces throughout the U.S. segment. He was joined in that ongoing checkout of the station atmosphere and environment by Tom Marshburn, who was taking a number of acoustic samples, basically measuring noise loads around the station to make sure they're within acceptable ranges for these astronauts. Also taking a number of water samples from the station's potable water supply. And then all that brings us to today, Friday, where the crew will be wrapping up, again, a pretty busy week. Commander Ford will be working inside of the regenerative environmental control and life support system on board the station, also known as ECLIS for short. He'll be replacing one of the recycling tanks inside. Also taking some time a little bit later this afternoon to participate in the reversible figures experiment. It's an ongoing European experiment that looks to track and monitor any changes in perception these astronauts have while operating in the microgravity environment. Meanwhile, our 3 Russian cosmonauts are doing a lot of work today upgrading the communication systems inside of the Russian segment. Novitsky and Tarelkin will be doing an audit of all of the communication headsets and push-to-talk units and cables, while Roman Romanenko works to remove a space-to-space radio located inside of the Zvezda service module. He'll also be taking out an antenna switching unit. The Russians will also be involved in reinstalling the TVIS, or the treadmill with vibration isolation and stabilization, in its regular home inside of the Zvezda service module. It just finished undergoing some regular maintenance. Meanwhile, Canadian Chris Hadfield was working on setting up some samples for the binary colloidal alloy test. It's a ongoing experiment that looks at the varying structure of particles known as colloids as they're suspended in microgravity. He'll also be working inside of the microgravity science glove box, doing an inspection of some of the equipment located inside and cleaning it out. And then our final crew member, Tom Marshburn, the resident doctor on board the International Space Station, will be conducting an eye ultrasound exam. Also pre-packing some more items for that Dragon spacecraft visit. And then he just wrapped up just a few minutes ago a Google Plus interactive event alongside Kevin Ford and Chris Hadfield, taking questions submitted by the general public from all over the world and giving them a look inside of life on board the International Space Station.
Typically, because we're all going very fast, 17,000.